broadly, just as the operation is has started over the weekend, expanded operation by the Israelis. I wondered, are you concerned about the sort of scenario that I think has been talked about quite a lot, that the Israelis are sort of going to enter a quagmire in Gaza, and this is going to basically drag on and sort of play into Hamas's hands, in that, as if this drags on for a long time, there are a lot of civilian casualties. Internationally, there's more and more disapproval of what Israel is doing. I wonder if that, is that a concern as this begins for the US?
So I will say, as a first thing, I will maintain my position of not kind of offering assessments of their military operations or any kind of prognostication about how they might proceed, other than to say that in our communications with them, we have talked to them about the importance of having tangible objectives that they can actually meet, and a plan to meet those objectives, and at the same time have said the same thing privately to them that we have said publicly, which is the need to protect civilian lives as they conduct their operations and to operate consistent with the laws of war and international humanitarian law. But I will say that there is another point to that larger question, which is we think one of the most important things we can do while Israel conducts these operations is to perform all this work I started this briefing talking about, which is to get humanitarian assistance into Gaza. And I should note, it is the United States of America that has been able to deliver these agreements to get food and water and medicine in. We've worked with the government of Israel, we've worked with the government of Egypt, we've worked with the United Nations and humanitarian organizations, but it is the work by the president, who has invested real time and energy on it, and the secretary, who has done the same, and of course our special envoy, David Satterfield, on the ground, who has been able to broker these agreements, and not just the agreements, but work out a lot of the operational details to get food, water, medicine on these trucks inspected and get them delivered in, and is working hard to get those numbers increased so we can have sustained deliveries even greater than the number that we had yesterday. So I will say, from our purposes, we think the best thing that we can do to address that larger question that you asked is to ensure that, to the maximum extent possible, civilians in Gaza are protected and they have the life-saving humanitarian assistance they need.
Sure. Just lastly, I wondered, we can come back to a discussion we had last week about, following the laws of war. I know that, you made some, I think your view was that the Israelis are not targeting civilians, but you haven't got an assessment on whether overall the operations are following the laws of war. I wondered, in the context of that, cutting off communications as the operation began, does that potentially speak to the issue of, as you mentioned, the Israelis have given warnings to civilians, but if you cut all the communications in a place, then doesn't that make it more difficult for them to follow through on what the Geneva Conventions would say, which is that you need to make as many efforts possible to avoid hitting civilians? And just an additional point on that, the Netanyahu's comments on Saturday, bringing up sort of biblical reference to Amalek. I wondered if that also weighs on how the US sees this, as if you're citing these kind of biblical verses, or making allusions to those historical facts, does that detract from your sense that the Israelis are going in here as a professional military trying to root out a terrorist group rather than something a little broader?
So I will say just one small detail on the first. They do have other methods they've used to notify civilians. They've dropped leaflets and other things in the past, but we do think that this is another one of the reasons why communications networks do need to be open and functional, is for these very real humanitarian purposes. And then, just with respect to the overall question, again, the Israeli Defense Forces are a professional military that have been doing this a long time. They're one of the most professional militaries in the region. And all we can do is continue to make clear to them that it is our expectation that they operate with the highest degree of professionalism and that they operate in full compliance with the laws of the war. And we've made that clear from the president on down.